Well, good day, my friends. Today we are in Denver, Colorado, and this is Pennsylvania Avenue. And if that sounds familiar, you're probably a fan of the Unsinkable Molly Brown, the story of the woman who survived the sinking Titanic. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all begins now. Yes, Molly Brown was in fact a real woman, and there was a great musical that Debbie Reynolds starred in called The Unsinkable Molly Brown, about this woman from the backwoods who falls in love with a man who sells his claim, becomes very rich, and moves to the upper crust of Denver, but nobody here accepts her. So she goes off to Europe, becomes cultured, comes back and throws a big party at her house that we see in the movie, and if you go see it live in the musical, and everyone loves her then. So we're gonna actually see what the real house looks like. And then of course Molly was on the Titanic and survived the sinking of the Titanic. I'm excited to see it. As we come upon it right here, I'm already thinking of in the movie when they're looking across the street at everything getting unloaded, which would have been Mrs. McGraw's house over there where they're gonna throw the party and Molly is not invited. Here is the real Molly Brown house. Oh, this is amazing. How majestic, right? And they are nice enough to give us a nice tour today. I called ahead. Look at all the cool things, the features to the house. I'm excited. I can't wait to hear the stories. And they say, of course, this place is haunted as well. They definitely did not use this house for the movie, but a lot of the same features, like the lions out front. So we're starting up here on the front porch, and if you've never seen the movie, and if you have seen the movie, it's quite a path to their riches, because the guy who falls in love with her, John Brown, sells a claim for $300,000, and Molly ends up hiding the money and burning it up, so he ends up having to do it all over again. So it's an interesting movie if you know nothing at all about it. Oh. Wow, there's the famous staircase. Wow, this is amazing. The features of the house, just when you had that kind of money back then. This is incredible.
So yeah, Mr. Brown had been in gold mining for 2.5 decades by the time they moved into this house, and I like to think that the gold anaglypta on the walls really is an expression of their pride and his tremendous hard work and then fortuitous gold strike. That quietly took actually almost a decade to orchestrate. So him and a whole consortium of people. So here in the house, you'll learn about why she was never called Molly. You'll get to learn about this time of year, things like Victorian funeral and death practices. You'll also get to learn about Titanic and her work with the Titanic Survivors Committee. There is so much to explore.
So right away I'm seeing, I mentioned in the movie, she has that big party and she's introducing all of her European friends, the Grand Duchess and everybody, and so it's not exactly the same type of staircase, but look at the amazing stained glass up there. What's really neat is that they actually told me that the whole reason this house still exists is because of the success of the movie. The fact that they made that movie and people still care helped them be able to get the foundation and everything to have this started and be able to do the tours. So It's amazing what a movie can do to bring history and real life and everything together. We'll just kind of lightly look around before the tour starts. Look at all the ornate stuff on the walls, the decorations. But since they're going to fill us in on information that is not part of the movie and things that we know already, I'll wait for a lot of it. Lots of old books. Nice library over here.
That's amazing. I actually next month am speaking at the
And they have a whole front room in here that's all dedicated to her Titanic history and how she got the foundation for the survivors started.
We have people exit out that door and enter through the exterior stairs, but this little stairs we have here is just for school groups.
It's a little bitty.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
There's the fireplace.
Yeah, it used to be, as you can see, this
That's
window
a
right here, it used to
pretty
be
great scene.
a coat closet, so obviously you wouldn't have to reach far up.
that's what I was gonna ask about. Like, this wasn't like
The stairs weren't.
okay, because I was like, there's a restroom.
Yeah.
That you couldn't get to.
Yeah.
And look at this. If you notice down here on this card, it says Mrs. J.J. Brown adopts 3 Titanic survivors. Russian woman who she befriended, weeps on shoulder of Denver heroine as they part.
Old Gracie. This is actually the first time this has been shown on a public exhibit. But the funny line is he's asking on Titanic stationery to get his opinion on it, how the ship would be. And he said, "It's a fine ship this is, but I shall await my journey's end before I pass judgment."
Yeah, I'll say.
So, pretty good call on his part.
Yeah.
But,
It's crazy they have the flag up there. Definitely the front entryway has that wow factor you always talk about in a house, you know. All the way down to an old telephone.
Cool. I guess you would have said no.
Welcome to the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver. This neighborhood is named for our Capitol building, which you can see through the tree. The leaves aren't falling off for me, they'll get there. But that building is actually completely built by the time the Browns move into this house. So in 1894, when the Browns move in, they will have a very similar view to what we have now, that way. And I'll explain how they got here to Denver in just a moment. But also in this neighborhood, just so you're aware, between 13th and 14th Street, there are probably about 3 or 4 to 5 residential houses here when the Browns lived here. Namely, there was a house built by the same architect directly north of us on that piece of property. Here's a photograph of those homes. We're in this house here. So I will pass that around while I'm just kind of winding out here for you to look at. That house was knocked down in the 1970s. That is part of our story here today, sort of historic restoration and, you know, saving buildings of significance to local communities. So that one is now, it's a lovely condo building, but it's not the same house. To the south of us, when the Browns lived here, for a large part of the time, it was actually a vacant lot. So the Browns would utilize that. Specifically, Margaret, if she was having a large gathering, would have people kind of spend some time over there, indoor-outdoor party, as it were. So with that, we are going to head inside. I will let you know that the entryway right now will probably be our most crowded spot in the house. So standing in the picture is Margaret Molly Brown. Seated next to her is her husband, JJ, James Joseph, but I'll be referring to him as JJ. On JJ's lap is daughter Helen. I always like to point out, it looks like she got a haircut the night before picture day, so to speak. Her bangs look nice and straight and everything, so I can just picture her in the kitchen maybe the night before having some arguments with her mother or something. Anyways. And then by Margaret's skirts there is their son Larry. You will see Larry is sporting an Irish tartan kilt. Both Margaret and JJ have Irish heritage that I'll be kind of recounting as we kind of learn more about them. But it's very evident in this photo. So how did that family of four end up here in Denver? Well, they were living in Leadville, Colorado. Leadville, Colorado at this point in time in history, specifically we're talking, that picture is 1892 or so, is a big mining community. Leadville elevation, 10,400 feet. It's especially known for its silver mining. JJ was working in the silver industry, although he was born in Pennsylvania. He was born and raised there, and like, many young men I can imagine at the time, decided to move west and, try different mining expeditions. He did do a short stint in Deadwood as well. But when he's in Leadville, he's doing pretty well for himself. He sort of, I guess, would be the equivalent of like a middle management kind of thing now. He eventually meets Margaret at a church picnic. Margaret ended up in Leadville by way of Hannibal, Missouri. And if Hannibal, Missouri sounds familiar, that's because that's actually the town where Mark Twain / Samuel Clemens is from. They did not know each other, but they are from the same hometown. So she's in Hannibal, Missouri, 18, 19 years old. She gets an offer from her brother, who is living in Leadville, to come on out, take the train, come out and live in Leadville for a while if you want. And she takes him up on the offer. So she moves from Hannibal, Missouri to Leadville. Leadville has an elevation of 10,400 feet and is about 2 hours from here. It's a great place to visit as well if you're in the area. So we believe they met at a church picnic. And it's actually not too long after this photo is taken that JJ proves to be very instrumental in a very large discovery of gold in Leadville. So it is that gold money that they decide to move from Leadville down here to just a mile high and purchase this house in 1894. In 1894, when they purchased the house, it sold for $30,000. Wow. Which is about the equivalent of $1 million today. Still, I think a bargain at $1 million, given real estate things now. But there are a lot of features in this room, especially, that we feel like the Browns would have felt very fortunate to be able to buy a house that had them. Does anyone want to take a stab at an item that they think maybe in the 1890s, if you were looking for a home and saw it, you'd be like, we have to have that? Ceiling, plumbing,
lights, electric,
heat, yes, all those things.
Phone.
All of them. Phone, yes, they were early adapters of the telephone, in fact. So yeah, the house, when it was constructed in 1889, is actually constructed with electricity, with central heating, and indoor hot and cold running water. We do have a complete bath on the second floor. It is a 5-bedroom, 1-bath house, which seems like a modern day nightmare, but then it would have been a luxury item for sure. So this house was definitely very modern for its era, state-of-the-art home, so who wouldn't want to live here? Margaret did paint our Anaglypta wallpaper gold when they moved in. This is a wallpaper treatment. Oftentimes people might think it's tin and such, which it does resemble, but both the ceiling and the walls are wallpaper, which is fun. In the house right now, you will notice we do have a lot of things about Halloween. Margaret was a spiritualist. as many Edwardian and Victorian, society women were. So we do pay tribute to that in the house. I'm not going to really be directly addressing any of that on this tour. You'll have time at the end if you want to explore things. That might be a good thing you want to concentrate on. But if you have a real pressing question, I'm happy to answer. And that goes for any questions that you have. So with that, when the Browns lived here, if you were invited to maybe spend some more time with them, you would probably be asked if you wanted to come into the drawing room. So why don't we do that now? Here in the drawing room, we have our exhibit that we started in April. It's a temporary exhibit through the end of the year. It centers on Margaret's role as one of the chair people of the Titanic Survivors Committee. So it really speaks about Margaret's time on the Carpathia after the Titanic disaster. So after the Titanic disaster, when they're on board, the survivors are on board the Carpathia, several first-class women come together and create a committee specifically to help second and third class passengers and surviving crew of the Titanic, to help them. They quickly realize that these people are kind of in dire straits. Not only are they going through a trauma, but let's face it, if you were in second or third class and you managed to survive, the male companion you were with, odds are they have passed, right? They're deceased. If you were moving from Europe to the United States in second or third class, all of your possessions are now at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So these people need help. Margaret and these two other women realized that fact and launched the Survivors Committee and a fund of money to help them. And they do, in fact, they help, if you need a train ticket, if you need clothing, they kind of have money and resources for those individuals. So the story in this room right now really centers on that till the end of the year. In these two particular cases, we have some wonderful artifacts that it would be a shame if you spent time in our house and you didn't see them, so I will be addressing them specifically. In this case, we have a letter that is written on Titanic letterhead that was posted from the Titanic. It is one of less than 10 letters that remain that are such, like that. This letter is actually written by a Titanic survivor. His name is Colonel Archibald Gracie. He survived the Titanic. This letter is posted, or he wrote it on April 10th, 1912, so days before the disaster. The crazy thing about this letter is the line that's written in it that goes, "It is a fine ship this, but I shall await journey's end before I pass judgment on her." Which is a pretty wild statement. And to me, the best part is the Colonel actually did pass judgment, because in 1913, there's a book published where he had gathered accounts from survivors and kind of spiffed them all up and published a book. Sadly, the Colonel did die in December of 1912, so someone kind of had to quickly get the book to print, but he did pass judgment indeed. Our Margaret here is in that book. Her account is in that book as well. It'd also be very wrong of me if I didn't mention at this point. Has anyone noticed that I'm not calling her Molly? Mm-hmm. That I'm referring to her as Margaret? Well, that is because during the course of her life, she probably was never really called Molly. Now that we've been a museum for 50 some odd years, we realize that after reading hundreds of personal letters, newspaper articles and such, there really isn't any time she's referenced as a Molly until after her death. It's picked up in some of the writings about her, and then it just kind of takes on its own life form, where the name, the moniker Molly is stuck to her still to this day. So I'll be calling her Margaret while we're in the museum. In terms of the Titanic Survivors Committee, not only did they help second and third class passengers and surviving crew, but they also wanted to thank the crew of the Carpathia. Behind us in the light box, or over there in the light box, we have the captain of the Carpathia standing with 45-year-old Margaret. He is holding what's known as the Loving Cup, which I believe is still on display in Belfast, Ireland at the museum there. He did a crazy amazing job. He's the only ship that turned around. They were actually traveling, the ship he was on, the Carpathia, or captaining, was traveling from New York to towards Europe. They actually had passed the point of the Titanic, and then, you know, with the distress calls and such, turn around to come back. They were the first ship on the scene by a significant margin. They were the first ship on the scene and picked up all the lifeboats. He did a commendable job of getting his ship ready. If you think about it, in an instant, they had 700 additional passengers on that boat, the survivors, who are going through, you know, trauma, shock, you know, realization that, you know, their life has just completely been altered. And, you know, they got the ship ready for these people and took care of them. The Titanic Survivors Committee wanted to thank the crew. So they actually gave gold, silver, and bronze medals to the crew, depending on your rank, which are, there's one of each in this case. And then Margaret passed this silver cup to the captain too. This ceremony's from May of 1912 is when they have this ceremony that you see the picture of. Did Margaret, you know, pass over this cup to him, but at some point she actually gives a personal thank you memento to the captain by way of this, there's an ushapti over here. It's an Egyptian souvenir. It's a antique Egyptian souvenir. It is not an Egyptian artifact, although it is an artifact for us here at the Molly Brown House Museum. She actually had picked that up in Egypt just prior to boarding the Titanic. She had been in Egypt and then went up to France and boarded the Titanic there. And at some point, as a thank you, she gives that ushapti to the captain as a personal thank you. One item I like to make sure I point out that I think exhibits Margaret's fondness for equality for women and women's right to vote is this painting. This painting, you know, it's a beautiful landscape, Rocky Mountains with the Platte River. But if you were to examine it closely, you would see the author is just noted as H.H. Chain, which seems, you know, innocent enough until you realize that that actually stands for Helen Henderson Chain, a female landscape artist. This would have been very controversial in Margaret's time, especially at her society level, because women were not supposed to paint landscapes. You're not supposed to go hiking in the wilderness. Maybe you had to camp overnight to get the best lighting or something. You know, so women were supposed to be at home in the parlor painting flowers and fruit. So the fact that Margaret had this painting definitely speaks volumes to something that's of interest to her throughout her whole life, which is equal rights for women, women's right to vote. Some of the objects, you know, we've lost over time just because the Browns haven't owned this house, you know, since the first time they bought it till now. So objects have found their way to different places in the country, other owners, etc. So we do have about 16% of those items, and of course that painting being one of them. This lamp is also another one. So we have a good smattering throughout the home, so if that's of something that's of interest, I'm happy to, I call out quite a few, but if you want more, I can do that too. Oftentimes, people who know about Margaret, the Unsinkable Molly Brown again, you know, she's either portrayed as uneducated, she's portrayed as crass, etc. And we know that that's actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Margaret, although she was born just 2 years after the end of the Civil War, received up to an 8th grade level of education. Her parents, although they were Irish immigrants, they still firmly believed that education was a way up, and they wanted to make sure all their children received good education. Her and all of her siblings received a very good education, and Margaret was by all accounts a lifelong learner, often hiring tutors to such a degree that by the time she passes away, she's actually fluent in 5 languages. She also can play a variety of instruments, which of course, given the time period, you know, playing the piano and other things would have been something that would have been expected of someone of her societal class. She could play the piano, the zither, and it's been reported she could also yodel. So it was also known that if she had a tutor in the house and you were visiting, you were probably going to take part in the lesson, and that included servants. So she was very generous with her education. The kids, you know, her and JJ, her husband, ensure that they get literally the best education money could buy. JJ's path to education is a little different, just due to the circumstances of his family and where he lived. All in all, he does end up getting a very good education over the course of his life. It just kind of has more start and stops, even to one point where the only mechanism for education and schooling in his town required tuition to be paid. And he was the oldest male in his family, so he was the one afforded that education. So they paid tuition for him to go to school. But he did value education. Again, both of their children received a wonderful education. Their son actually does a stint at Colorado School of Mines. Their daughter actually does a stint at the Sorbonne University in Paris. That's actually why Margaret is in Europe before she boards the Titanic. She's actually visiting her daughter who's going to school there. In this space, in terms of the house itself, one item I always like to make sure I point out is this bookcase right here. This bookcase was here when the Browns lived here. They actually had 3 of the walls pretty much surrounded with books. This bookcase, though, does leave us for a little while when it goes to another family to live, and then has come back to us. So not every book is theirs. The ones we can verify were owned by the Browns is a set of encyclopedias over here. They're big tan volumes over on this wall. So those were owned by the Browns, and the only ones we can really officially verify. Everything else does seem in line with someone of this, lifelong learner and what they would probably have in the home. Talking about Margaret or the house, if it weren't for the money and the gold that he discovered. So we want to make sure we're learning a lot more about him than we used to know. One of our volunteers actually did a lot of research for us recently, which is great. So you want to explore that room and these 2 rooms. Here I can definitely envision Margaret discussing many of the things that her and JJ were interested in and wanted to support here in Denver. Namely that Catholic cathedral that I pointed out. So that is the Church of Immaculate Conception. And Margaret was actually the chairperson for one of the larger fundraisers for the establishment of that church. Margaret and JJ, once they come into this wealth with the gold discovery, they do take a lot of time to travel. They travel all over the world, even going as far as China, Japan, and India. Margaret definitely felt she was very lucky to be able to do that. She had the time and money to be able to do that, where a lot of people didn't. And she knew a lot of people here in Denver who probably never had the opportunity to travel. So as a fundraiser for that church, Margaret devised what is known as the Carnival of Nations. The Carnival of Nations is, sort of like a little mini World's Fair here for the Denverites in the area. You could go in, experience some things you may never have been able to experience, look at samples of architecture and things. The Rocky Mountain News reports that during the weeks that it ran for about 3 weeks, it raised the equivalent of about $250,000 to today's money. So pretty good fundraiser for sure. And I can picture maybe some early planning sessions going on here. It's also interesting to note, as a side note, we get a glimpse of some other of Margaret's belief systems in some of the newspaper articles. In one such article, it talks about how the Carnival of Nations was paused for a little bit due to a workers' strike, the building of the event. And then once that strike was sort of smoothed over, Margaret is quoted as saying she would only accept people with certain union cards in. She wouldn't accept scabs in to help with the work. So she was definitely pro-union, or definitely more pro-union than a lot of her societal peers for sure. So I can definitely envision discussions happening here. Other discussions that most likely would have occurred here include ones with Judge Benjamin Lindsay. Judge Benjamin Lindsay was a Denver area judge. If you are from Denver and have ever had to show up for jury duty and gone to the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse, this is the Judge Lindsay that is named for. He had wanted to establish a juvenile court system in Denver. There weren't really a lot of those courts in the country. There were a couple on the East Coast. So what that actually meant for minors, if you were like children minors, not minors, if you were like a 12-year-old accused of a crime, you just went to jail with everybody else. Judge Lindsay did not think that was a great idea and wanted to implement a juvenile court system. And he definitely enlisted Margaret as a positive voice piece for that. So she did work with him on trying to get, a run of good support for that event, or for that institution. We are fortunate enough to have a photo of Margaret in the house. And it's actually in this room. She's probably standing right about here. And the picture is going towards the library, so you can even see the extent to how large the table is with all its like crystal and all that kind of stuff. She was definitely known as a very successful entertainer, and I think that table kind of hits it home. There is one where I'm going to pass it this way. There is a party, a very large party she hosts, where apparently 800 people showed up, or like were invited in and out. So definitely a spot for entertainment. In terms of this room, in terms of objects, one that I like to make sure I point out, because I think it tells us a lot about JJ and how people felt about JJ, is not the snake, but next to it we have a sterling silver and cranberry glass punch bowl. And that punch bowl was actually a wedding gift to Margaret and JJ from the miners in Leadville. So the miners pooled all their resources together enough to be able to afford that for the newlyweds. And assuming, I assume they probably knew JJ a little bit better, right? He'd been there longer and they were actually working with him. I just think that speaks a lot about his character and the type of person he was, that they were willing to kind of part with their money, or enough of them were willing to part with a little bit of their money to be able to afford that. What's up with the ceiling? So this is a remnant from the original homeowners. So the house, again, it was built in 1889. The Browns moved in 1894, so there was a set of homeowners in between. With the silver market crash of 1893, they decided to move to California. Whether they had to move or they chose to move, it's not for me to say, but they're the ones who sold the house to the Browns. Mary Large had wanted atrium on the property. So atrium, greenhouse, conservatory were all the rage in construction during this Victorian Edwardian time. However, the footprint of the house that you're in and the yard that the house sits on is pretty much the same now as it was then. So there was no room in the architectural design for a greenhouse. So we have a mural of glass panes of a greenhouse with palm trees. Yeah.
Oh, that's painted on.
It's painted on. This is a recreation of what's underneath. If you look closely, you can see the ceiling is dropped a little bit compared to that one there. But paint analysis and all that, and we do have photographic evidence of this print as well on the ceiling. So it's not cobwebs, although it works very well for us right now. It is in fact supposed to be a greenhouse. Was actually at one time one large piece that Margaret picked up in Europe on one of their many travels. She actually did have it cut in half, and the piece that is over by that end of the room, by that little door, actually belongs over here on this side. Whether she decided to break it up because she wanted to pass by this couple more often, or the roof lines, I'm not, it's not for me to say, but I think the roof lines actually look nice coming up as a triangle. So. All right, it's gonna be a little tight, I'm sorry. There's another chair.
Wow. They did the gold all the way.
So we are here in the sunroom. By all accounts, this was one of Margaret's favorite spaces in the home, and I can definitely see why. She gets vantage point of many of our stained glass windows. We do have 5. They are original to the home, and they were constructed by a company called Watkins Stay Glass. That company is still in business today. So when we need assistance with them, times when the glass seems to be sagging, they come up and help us with our glass. So that is wonderful. I can see it. So that's one reason why Margaret probably loved this space. Also, we face west. The window here faces west. So Margaret would have had a view of lovely sunsets, Rocky Mountains. So that would have been lovely, of course. She also would have been able to see the completed Capitol building in a state where she could vote. Women in Colorado could vote in 1893. So definitely a sense of pride. It was a cause she believed in and she did a lot of work for. So being able to see that out her window would have felt good, I'm sure. She also would have probably seen the construction on the church that her and her husband did a lot of fundraising and donation to, the Church of Immaculate Conception. So all in all, a wonderful space. There is also a patio out there where she would take tea. And again, that's where newspapers report she yodels from. I don't know how much the neighbors would have thought about that, but
Or she yells out the window in the movie.
yeah, exactly. So I'm going to give you a basic layout of this floor, just so you know you can prioritize things you might want to do once we're done. And then I'll kind of wind out the story of Margaret and some of her later life accomplishments after the Titanic. So in the room right here next to us we have it set up for children. It does talk about their kids, Larry and Helen, and sort of what they end up doing and those sorts of things. There is a child-friendly exhibit in there, but there's a lot of good information regardless of your age. So that is for you to explore if you wish. Next door, we have a room that's set up as with more information about Margaret. That results in the separation just seems to be a general growing apart over time. I mean, if you really do kind of think about it, they had money and resources and time to do whatever they each wanted to do. So, we don't know exactly why they chose to do that. It was just a legal separation. It was not a divorce. They were Catholic after all, so it was just legally. Splitting hairs, but so be it. In that separation, Margaret does get ownership of this house outright. So as of 1909, Margaret is a homeowner of this house. She also gets a very generous stipend from JJ. Again, good old JJ taking care of everyone that he's feels responsible for. After that separation, we see Margaret traveling a lot. She's spending a lot of time in Newport, Rhode Island for the suffrage cause. You may know that Alva Vanderbilt Belmont is a very big mover and shaker for the suffrage movement in Newport. Margaret was friends of hers and did take part in that women's conference at Marblehead. Margaret also, after the Titanic, runs for U.S. Senate. She is a candidate for Senate, encouraged by the Women's League of Voters to run for that position. She does launch her campaign. She eventually does back away from it because there's concern that the suffrage vote may be spread too thin amongst candidates, and they really want the Women's Party, wants to throw support behind a candidate, have everybody consolidate behind a candidate that will hopefully win. So she does back out of that race. Sort of the last act of Margaret's life actually sees her acting. She acts on stage and she teaches acting. And she's actually staying at the Barbizon Hotel in New York City, teaching acting when she does pass away in 1932. Prior to that, though, just months prior to that, Margaret is actually the recipient of the highest civilian award from the country of France. The Legion of Honor Award is awarded to her in 1932 for efforts that she did to help support France. We're not quite sure, to be honest, exactly what those efforts were. There's no documentation spelling out a list. We've even contacted the powers that be in France. But it seems as though, between efforts to help with the Titanic, Margaret very much wanted to help during World War I, so much as as offering to go to the front line to act as a nurse and offer up some of her housing as hospitals. We do know that she had certain works translated into Braille for soldiers who were blinded during World War I, so she was very supportive of that effort and the country of France throughout her life. So it did culminate in her getting that award from the country of France. But when she does pass away in 1932, she's living again in New York City, but she still owns this house. Now 1932, of course, is the height of the American Great Depression, and neither of her children are currently living in Denver, and they've now inherited a 7,500 square foot house in Denver. What are you going to do with that? So they just decide to sell. They sell the house and all of its contents. All of that sells for just under $5,400. Does anyone remember how much the house cost originally?
$30,000.
$30,000. So it's at that point the house becomes, a series of, rental properties and such. All the rooms become apartments. Like this room, actually, there's a photograph where there's actually a sink just on the other side, so they tap into radiator lines for plumbing and things like that. Rooms are rented out, and it pretty much is in that kind of state for about 40 years. When the last homeowner, private owner of the house, knew he wanted to sell the property, he knew Margaret had lived here, and he was fearful it might be knocked down. As he was seeing buildings in the area being knocked down, and again, he was scared it was going to happen, and it does happen again to that house that was there. Thankfully, he found enough people who agreed with him. They came together to create the nonprofit organization known as Historic Denver. That is the nonprofit that I technically work for. We run the museum and have been doing so for over 50 years. We continue to research about Margaret and her extended family. We also act as stewards for the community if people want historic registrars for their house, resources. We hope to keep Denver voices and places alive through our efforts. We're told that she helps out.
That was like Carpathia. How about
So here, this is the sunroom that we were just hearing about. They said that she did hold seances here.
I'm not sure. That's a good. Yeah.
And that was a very valiant thing for her to do, helping out the victims of the Titanic, because you got to remember it was women and children first, so all the people that made most of the money, the head of the households, would have been gone. So I showed you the kids' bedroom. They said basically they don't know which rooms would have been whose. They're just not able to find out, and they used to travel a lot and have a lot of friends and family, so they just have the rooms set up with exhibits, not so much dedicated to anyone in particular. But they did say for having 5 rooms, they only had 1 bathroom. They've definitely decorated it well. If you think about that, you know, it's crazy to think of, but a lot of people sell their house with all the belongings and everything still in it, all the furniture going with it. They also said at this time that they would have probably had separate bedrooms. JJ having his own bedroom and Molly having her own.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I didn't see that first.
I want to see that original bathroom, which I guess would have been here. I guess that would have been luxury for the day, but that also means when they converted it to apartments later on, that it would have been a shared bathroom. So we have another bedroom in here. Just a smaller one. Then this would have been for the servants, and that takes you down to another exhibit. But we have this room still to see. Titanic life vest replica. It was actually a prop from the movie. There's a plate from the boat. And there's a bunch of White Star plates and silverware, which was the cruise line. Coal from the Titanic. Wow, it is so amazing to be inside this place. Well, I want to see what's on the 3rd floor, so let's go upstairs. 3 floors, we might as well see all 3. Another bedroom. They said this is the most heavily retouched room of the tour and of the house. And then there's Kathy Bates playing Molly Brown in the movie Titanic. That's got to be one of the crazier things I've ever heard, that she went her entire life as Margaret Brown and nobody called her Molly Brown in her life till after she was gone, and now that's what she's known as, and that's what this house is known as, the Molly Brown house. Well, what did you think? I loved it. I have seen the Unsinkable Molly Brown several times in my life. I've always kind of wondered what the real house was like. Surprisingly, not much like the movie, and the story not much like the movie, but it's still a great movie, and her life story is amazing. Their life story here is amazing, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you all for watching, and as I said earlier, they told me if it weren't for the movie, The Unsinkable Molly Brown starring Debbie Reynolds, this place probably wouldn't have the funding or the interest to keep it alive. So thank you everyone for watching. Come and support this place if you can. We'll see you next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.